Well, hello. I was going to say good morning, everyone, and hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and the other host joining us, I guess we're both co-hosts, is Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today there, Dr. J?
I'm doing good, and thanks for calling me Dr. J. But I hopefully I don't get any type of strikes for taking somebody else's name.
You,
But
Dr. Joe Hamlett. It's just an
you're right. I
initial. It's
know
just an initial.
but yeah, I'm doing pretty good today, Dave.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, today's topic is going to be staying relevant. I'm not saying that as a sentence. The topic is actually staying relevant. And I don't mean the topic is staying the topic itself is staying relevant. So
Right.
that could go on for hours. I just realized that. It's like
Yeah.
just that loop that just keeps going. So staying relevant. Yeah. What does that mean? What does staying relevant mean to you, Joe?
So I think in terms of if we're thinking about our professional careers, our jobs, and things like that, I think of that individual that's say been working at the same company for 20 years. Are they staying relevant? And what I mean by that is, are they still doing the same things they did 20 years ago? Have they upgraded their skills? Have they gotten certifications? I mean, again, say 20 years is a long time in a career, but during that time, think about all the changes, in
Yeah.
technology and things like that, information. So are you, as an employee or worker, staying relevant to your craft? Again, you may be doing the exact same thing that you did 20 years ago, but have you learned the latest and greatest, on how to, say you're an electrician? Are you using the new tools, the new gadgets, things that are going to make you relevant or keep you relevant? So this is the way I always look at it is, if I'm working for a company and tomorrow they close their doors, 150 of us, are now out in the workforce again or looking for jobs. So am I going to be competitive? The skills that I've learned over the year, are those going to be enough if I haven't stayed relevant, if I haven't, continued to advance my knowledge base as far as whatever that career is? So that's what I think of when I think of staying relevant. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Joe, I am in total agreement with you, and we're going to pull this thread till it becomes a rope today. And yeah, there's lots of pieces to that when we talk about staying relevant. For me, when we start talking about staying relevant, um, and we talk about professional development and
Mhm.
personal development, those are not just a one and done
Right.
type thing.
Yep.
Yes, you get your education or your certification or certificate of completion, or you learn a skill set, but that's not static. It change. Things grow and develop and
Right.
change. If we
Right.
look at the tech industry, if someone was involved in developing software applications in the 1980s, dare I say,
Right.
that's a lot different than applications and coding today. um, Leadership, that's another one. Just because you
Right.
went to a leadership course 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years ago doesn't mean that there hasn't been modifications or improvements or design elements to make those things better. And because those things have
Right.
occurred. The medical industry,
Right.
got to stay relevant because, open heart surgery is a lot different than it is now than it was, 30, 40, 50 years ago. The techniques and the tools are way different in
Right.
many cases. So, we can go on and on with a variety of different industries, whether it's engineering or education. Education, let's talk about that. And I'm not talking higher ed. Let's look at just K-12, for example,
Right.
because higher ed will pull into that. But when COVID hit, if you didn't stay relevant, you were out of a job. And
Right.
staying
Yep.
relevant meant understanding the various learning management system platforms that are available in an online or virtual environment.
Right.
So
Yep.
when we talk about staying relevant, what we're doing right here is staying relevant. Podcasting. We started this, many months ago. When we had thought, we talked about it for many months, actually longer
Right.
than months.
Right.
We were like, but how do we stay relevant? And part of staying relevant was participating in a medium that people enjoy. And this is one of them. And, our podcast. So how do we get the word out? How do we spread, and share the knowledge that we have? And that's through staying relevant, understanding what tools are available. The wooden mallet to
Right.
drive a toothpick into a piece of wood. Well, we have iron hammers and nails now. Why not use those? Right.
Right. Right.
So transportation, we can go back to horses, but we've got rockets and cars and trains, oh my,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, there's lots of different ways that we can look at staying relevant. And those are just a few examples. Industry relevant, education, training, those are all types of relevancy. Our language and how we communicate, that might seem silly when we talk about euphemisms and jargon and acronyms. Those have changed significantly over the
Right.
years.
Right.
The lingo of the 1950s and 40s is much different from the lingo that we use
Right.
nowadays
Yeah.
colloquially in society. I mean, if I say some of the things, the movie references, I like to use movie references when I do workshops and training, and it's like, and I date myself immediately, and I let the people know I'm going to date
Right.
myself, because I think some of them, those movie quotes are still relevant, and if at least they may not be the most current, but they're still relevant in their application. So understanding how language plays a big part of relevancy, especially in the workplace and industry, is really important. I remember, 20 years ago when, the, terms like perspective and lens were the buzz, and they're still industry terminology.
Right.
But another term that's come into industry over the last 10 years is the term optics. And when I first
Right.
heard that, I was like, what are you talking about optics? Are you talking about like fiber optics? Are you talking about optics as in like lenses on, satellites where they're taking imagery from, thousands of miles up, or, hundreds of miles up, and, other, star system? What kind of optics are you talking about? And people are like, it's like perspective. I said, well, say perspective. You mean like a lens, right? And they're like, it's like perspective and a lens, but it's optics. And I'm like,
Right.
well, I guess I have to stay relevant. So I
Well,
started using optics.
well, Dave, you brought up a very good point about the need to continue to, with the personal development, professional development. Like you mentioned, you may have had a leadership course 10 years ago, that was relevant and had all the key terms and everything, the
Yeah.
buzzes that was back then. But now, that's changed. I often think back when I was going through leadership training, when they talked about everybody was a certain type of leader.
Mhm.
That was the category you fit in. And that's just not the case today. It's
Yeah.
more that ability to be able to go back and forth,
Yes.
but using a variety of leadership
Yeah.
styles. And
Yeah.
so,
It's evolved.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's the key, that, yeah, once before you may have had your training, but is it still relevant? And the topic we're talking about, is it still utilizing the same techniques and things that are now proving to be better, methods and ways of doing things? So just because you had that particular training years ago, does not get that box checked. I remember going through training just, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago with a gentleman, that's, after we finished the training, he said, Yeah, I'm good. I don't need that stuff. I've already had leadership training before, and to me, it became really obvious that you did need it because
Mhm.
your leadership style was from decades before, and so you basically brushed that all to the side and said, "I'm good where I am." So you really weren't staying relevant, in my eyes. That's what I thought of this gentleman, and so that's what I would think about in terms of if people think they're relevant, are you really staying relevant again because you've taken that class years ago, and so when you sit through this new training, you're not paying attention. You
Right.
still keeping your mind focused on, well, I already did this before, I heard this before. Really, have you heard it said this way now, or demonstrated this way, or discussed this way?
And and you just said it, demonstrated. So staying
Right,
relevant knowledge wise is one piece of it. Staying relevant practitioner wise is the
right,
other piece. You can take that class 5 years ago and really not much has changed in, let's
right,
say,
right,
woodworking. But if you haven't practiced your craft, are you still relevant in your
right.
skill level and performance? So that's another piece of it. And I'm glad you brought that up. I'll let you continue your story.
No, again, just to your point that we like you say, some of the knowledge doesn't change that much, but having that ability to go ahead and apply. Because again, I think back to that individual that's been doing the same job for 20 years. Um, are they in the same capacity as when they started 20 years ago? Because now they may be more in a leadership role
Hmm.
where they're not doing it as frequently. So even
Right.
though they may have even continue their training throughout the years. Are you demonstrating? Are you applying it?
Right.
So to your point, that is a good reference that even though you may be still acquiring that knowledge, still gaining it, are you practicing it? Are you taking that time to get out there and perform it? And that was one common thing that I liked about the military is the fact that, especially a maintainer, there was once a year or twice a year, a quality insurance inspector will come out and say, "Hey, let me see you do that task," just to see
Yeah.
again back to that relevant piece. Are you still relevant? Can you still perform the task? And I think that's really what it comes down to. That you still have that ability
Yeah.
to
And
do
and
it.
we can say, well, my job doesn't really change that much. Well, maybe it hasn't, but are you still staying relevant with the new portions that are coming your way or that
Right,
have come
right,
your way over the last several years? And an example I want to put out there is like company travel. When early in my career with the military, you would go to the travel office, they would do everything for you.
right,
Now, not so much. When I
right,
early in my corporate career, same thing. It's like we're going to send you to a training or a seminar or an event or a, workshop, and then they would take care of everything, and you might get a company credit card
right,
just to do your meals and lodging and stuff, and then the company would pay it, they would do the finance piece. Now, a lot of companies are like, here's your training on travel, here's your training on finance, here's your company
right.
credit card,
Yep,
make it happen. When you get back, pay for it, and then we will reimburse you.
right.
That's a whole nother skill set that's part of our jobs now.
Yep,
That's staying relevant. The technology piece is staying relevant. The skill sets. Again, going back to industry, what are the industry standards? And the practitioner piece of it. Okay, maybe you are into napping, you know, flint or metalwork or whatever, or welding. Some of those
right,
things really don't change a whole lot, but if you're not practicing it, then you're not staying relevant.
right, right. Yeah. So, um, even me and Dave both were, you know, college professors, adjunct professors. That was one of the things we often had to do was just stay relevant by,
Mhm.
either um, writing articles or you know peer reviewed articles
Yeah,
too, and not
or
just something
publishing or
yeah,
what. Yeah.
or doing workshops and making sure
Yeah.
you're staying relevant because you're expected to go out there and train or teach someone else. But again, if you're using those old methodologies or styles or whatever it is, then you're not going to make that individual that you're teaching relevant, because now
Right.
you're already giving them stuff that's behind the time. So anytime we think about um, continuing to progress in our careers, we should always be thinking about staying relevant. What's the latest and greatest? What's the new technologies? What's the new features? Even in, even some of our software platforms where the upgrades are made. Are you staying relevant and understanding what those new changes are, what those
Mhm.
additions are? How are they going to make your life a little bit easier? So, you know, I like the way you said it earlier. It's not just that one time, you get the certificate and you're done. It's that continuous
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And
It's a
if you view it,
lifelong
absolutely, and
event.
that's why, most people should be lifelong learners, because you're going to continue to learn. If you want to progress, you're going to continue to learn to stay relevant.
Yeah.
And so anybody that says, no, I don't want to continue learning, then you basically shut yourself down. You made yourself not relevant,
Right.
because regardless if you stay with the same company for 30 years, you're still going to have to learn something. So if you're telling me as I'm your employer, you say I'm done learning, then really, do I need you anymore? If
Yeah.
you're not going to stay relevant, if you're not going to stay up with the times,
Or
um,
how soon will you be of value to the company? How long will you
right,
remain valuable to the company if you're
absolutely.
not
If you
growing or
choose not to do,
maintaining your relevance?
right. And I think that's, you know, as you get older in your career, and you have that sense of, well, I did my part, I did my time, now I'm just going to coast the rest of my time till retirement or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
That doesn't fare too well
Yeah.
for employers. Again, to your point, they're going to be like, well, really thinking about what value are you adding to the organization anymore.
Yeah.
I experienced that a lot, my later years in the military, where people would get to the point where they've got so many years in it, they think, well, I'll just go a few more years and I'll retire. But at the same time, the impact you're having on those people that are following you, for one, they're watching you. Two, you're no longer relevant. We can't, send you anywhere. You can't do any more um, deployments and things like that, because you haven't stayed relevant.
Or you haven't learned the new piece of
Or you have,
equipment
yeah. And
or
so
machinery
now
or tools. Yeah.
we send you down line, and you're not effective, because you haven't, stayed up to the point where you need to be. So
Yeah. Those are great points, Joe. I'm glad you brought those up, and those are excellent examples. I'd like to kind of switch gears and let's look at staying relevant on the personal side. And
mm,
and some of the viewers and listeners might be scratching their head, going, "Well, how do you stay relevant on the personal side, Dave?" Let's hear this. These words of wisdom that you're going to.
yeah,
You know.
I want to hear these things
So
too.
yeah. I want to be relevant. I want to be relevant. Um, so let's look at automobiles, for instance. Are we relevant with our automobiles? And if we have not stayed relevant, what kind of challenges does that pose? And I recall seeing something again online, staying relevant on a personal level, maybe is having a computer, or I'm gonna just do this, a cell phone with it used to be, the landline to the house,
Right,
and then it went to the cell phones that were basically just data-based usage, and now we have internet usage and applications where we can start our car and run the
right, right.
dishwasher from our phones. So we talk about staying relevant. Technology is one piece of it. Well, and going back to the automobiles, I recall seeing something online several months ago or a little bit longer that said, you know, car manuals used to come with instructions on how to adjust the timing chain.
Right. Yep.
We don't do that anymore because
Right.
things have changed and evolved. We don't need to do that. We don't. The professionals at the dealerships and the shops that maintain the cars do need to maintain their relevancy, because some of that still applies, some of it doesn't. There's a lot more computer-based technology involved in the vehicles. as a vehicle owner, I might not have to adjust the timing chain, but I do need to understand how the various electronics and electronic panels and touch screens now work in our vehicles.
Right.
I mean, so there is relevancy to that. There's relevancy to healthcare. You know, there was a time where we walked around and would have never thought of wearing masks. It's like, why do that? You know, mask, okay, we'll do a little hand sanitizer, you know, once in a while. But now it's like for a lot of folks, that's become kind of commonplace, or at least it did for a couple of years during COVID. So there is that relevancy piece. And I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent about mask wearing. That's your own personal choice. I'm just saying that's an example of being relevant for that period of time. What are some other examples you can think of about maintaining relevancy from a personal development side?
So you still kind of got me stumped on that, Dave. I mean, you know, you say relevance by wearing your mask or not wearing your mask. So I guess I'm still kind of confused on how that becomes personal
Well, I
or
guess you could talk about personal care being relevant. So maintaining being relevant on a personal level. So, what are the latest trends that are sticking on maybe raising your children or pet care? There are certain things that were relevant 50 or 100 years ago that may not be so relevant today. So, and again, it may be a little bit more challenging to think of some personal examples,
yeah, I mean,
but
you know,
there is a facet to it.
I mean, even the pieces you're talking about, you know, personal relevance as far as
Maintaining your home, you know, maybe, you know,
well, I
HVAC has changed, electricity, some of the
well
standards of electricity have
that's a very
changed.
good example. I mean, as
DIY,
far
people
as
like DIY
right.
activities.
Well, you know, even like you say, the HVAC system, we actually had ours changed because when it was put in, you know, so many years ago, it was under capacity and things like that. So I understand that part of it. Yeah, the technologies have kind of, you know, created a change as far as solar panels, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and you did mention about, you know, the way you raised your kids back then compared to the way we raise them now. I mean, yeah. Um, Even when our kids were younger, some of the things, you know, like education was the number one thing we talked about. Now it's mainly because me and the wife never had that opportunity. So
Right.
for us, that became a relevant piece. We thought, but now, you know, the way things have changed, the market got saturated with people getting degrees,
Yep.
and so people stop, you know, learning trades and things like that. So now today, if you're raising kids, you might tell them, you know, maybe consider trades versus going to school,
Or
going into debt and
even the
things like
types of
that.
activities that we do with our kids, you know, from being relevant to playing outside until
Right,
the street light comes on.
right, right,
I'm not so sure that's the best idea anymore, to
right,
just
right,
let
right.
your, you know, younger children just run amok. You know,
Yep.
I know I used to, you know, wander blocks away when
Oh,
I was, you know,
absolutely,
like 7, 8,
absolutely.
10 years old. Blocks,
Right,
you know, a mile or more was not
right,
uncommon. And now it's like, you know, relevancy, you want your kids a lot closer.
right, right.
Relevancy, what types of games were available then? I think personally, maybe we should bring back some of those interactive opportunities with our children where we're more directly involved. But there
Well, you
are
know,
other options like
it's
video
funny
games
if
and the
you. It's funny
internet.
you
There's
say
all
that.
kinds of things.
You know, with our grandkids now, you know, we play. My wife mainly plays board games. You know, how
Mhm.
when was the last time you played a board game?
There is a relevancy to that because it went
Absolutely.
away, and now some of those things are coming
Right,
back.
absolutely. Because you know, to your point, what you said about, you know, most of the kids, even my 9-year-old, 8-year-old grandson is really good at video games. But again, that's a different environment now. Who are they
Right.
playing against? You know, what's on the other side of
Exactly.
you know, connection. So now with them going
Personal
back to the card,
relationships. I
yeah,
mean,
I mean,
talk
so
about social
you're
networking and that sort of thing. That's another personal relevancy. being on some of these social media sites does not have to be just a professional piece. There's a personal side, whether it's communication or staying in touch or
Right.
whatever. So there are different types of relevancy and different perspectives about those relevancies. Some folks are like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that, whether it's whatever personal piece you want to look at. And other folks are like, no, I do want that piece in my life. So it's
So,
really about perspective too.
so that's where I was going to go. So again, that could be, I would say that could be tricky because
It can
again,
be.
you know, people, some people you still hear people say, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on
Right. They
LinkedIn, I
want
don't have
they're
these
sticking to
accounts.
more their roots or what's considered
So,
traditional by
so I
them.
guess my question is, are they still relevant though? Personal.
That's the interesting thing about it. It's about it boils down to perspective and need.
Right.
So staying relevant is important, but it's also important to understand what your perspective and what your attitude is on being staying relevant and what that means to you as an individual and what that means to you career wise. They may or may not align.
And so that's where I was going to go, kind of play devil's advocate as far as the career path. I mean,
Mhm.
again, to those, you know, some of those members that were in the military that had that opinion that, you know, I've done this many years, I'm not going to do anything more.
Right.
So their perspective is, I've done my part, but as the employer or as the, you know, person on the other side of that, that's not the way they view it. So you're right, perspective is a huge part of that. So that could be a challenge, but I still, you know, I said it before, I still go back to the fact that if you want to progress,
Yes.
I think that's the key. If you want to continue to move forward and stay relevant in what our society is calling, you know,
Right.
relevant at that time,
Yeah.
then you're going to have to progress and move forward. So,
Yeah.
you know, back to the personal level, where if you don't want to be on social media and things like that, then that's still your personal preference. Um, but at the same time, what are you missing out on as far as how our technology is moving forward
Right.
and whether you're going to be included in that? So,
Yeah. And there are
um,
pros and cons to both sides of
right,
things. You
right,
know, there with technology like we have right now, we're seeing each other, virtually,
right,
and I can see your face and you can see mine, and we're communicating, but there is that lost art, and they call it a lost art of letter
right.
writing.
Yeah,
So, relevancy is there is a certain amount of perspective that goes along with it.
right.
So, in the last few minutes, Dr. Joe, what are your final thoughts on staying relevant?
Well, like I just kind of briefly said, I think it really still comes down to it's still your own personal preference on which path you choose. But I would think in a professional setting, at work, if you want to progress in that environment, I would say more than likely you're going to have to stay relevant as far as stand up on the technology and new
Yeah,
breakthroughs in whatever industry you're in. That's how we continue to advance or evolve. You said it earlier. So if you again are in that environment, I would uh, suggest or recommend that you stay as relevant as you can. Again, if you're going to get to a point where you're saying, you know, I'm done, I'm going to retire in a couple of years. Again, that's your choice, and that's probably what'll happen. But if you want to continue to move forward with the organization, continue to grow, then the expectation is that you're going to have to stay relevant.
yeah,
Again, whether that's take reoccurring training or being adaptive, and because things have changed over the years, and if you were, you know, started years ago and all they had was a pencil and paper, and now we're
paper
using
applications, and now it's
exactly, now we're
online.
using all software, and you know, so again, those are the things you'll have to consider for yourself as far as whether you're going to stay relevant or not. And to, you know, our point about the personal side, whether you want to, you know, get on social media platforms or choose not to, I mean, that's still a personal choice. And I don't know that they'll ever overlap as far as in the future, whether that's going to be an expectation, I don't know. But a
Yeah,
lot of things are. on different social media platforms that you may not see.
Yeah.
So that's I guess that's all I have is, again, is depending on where you're headed with your career,
Yeah.
um, find out what that industry requires, and stay relevant to that point if you want to continue to progress.
Yeah. Well said, Dr. Joe. With that, I do not have anything to add that would add any real value. I think we've
Okay.
pulled that thread, turned it into a rope, and now it's starting to fray a little bit. So with that, I'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in to another episode. If you liked what we had to say, if you gleaned some sort of nugget out of it that you can share, please like and share what we have, uh, created here for you all. And until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.